Hello and welcome. You're watching France 24, and it's the interview. Some will clearly say that Russia does not understand the way in which the world is moving. It may have changed who is at its head, but it has not changed its ideology since the USSR. Others will go up in an uproar against Western stereotypes. Russia will move at its own pace with sometimes an iron fist and its own values. You'll see that these general topics are very topical, and we are going to ask them to His Excellency, the Ambassador of Russia to France. Thank you for coming.
Good day to you.
The first question I have to ask is concerning domestic politics in Russia. Does the regime feel sufficiently threatened in order to resort to measures which are often repressive, be it trials of demonstrators? Are there threats of banditry?
No, that's very much an exaggeration. It's even a caricature of the present situation in the Russian Federation. The Russian leaders do not consider themselves to be threatened from the inside in any sense, far from it. I mean, if you're referring to some of the events during demonstrations in Moscow, well, I see things like that on television here all the time, be it in Paris or Madrid or elsewhere.
Well then, why
there
these
are
trials?
No political trials.
Are these?
No, these are ordinary trials. When people demonstrate, they should demonstrate peacefully. But if they start to provoke the police, to throw stones, metal bars, and start fighting with troublemakers, I mean, in any democratic country, troublemakers are always
What about Mr. Udaltsov? Do you think that Mr. Udaltsov, who is an opponent of the regime, is a troublemaker, is someone who is a threat to public order?
No, Mr. Udaltsov is not a rioter personally, but he is someone who has incited people, encouraged people, violent people, because he wanted to provoke incidents during demonstrations.
Well then, how can you explain that in Russia, still dealing with domestic politics, there is no opposition, no alternative political party that seems to be coming to the forefront? How is this hegemony?
Well, that really shows how absolutely ignorant you are of what's happening in Russia. I'm sorry to have to put it that way. But at the present time in Russia, there are several dozen political parties that have been registered. This is thanks to the political reform that was initiated by President Medvedev last year. At the last elections that were held in Russia, they were regional elections just a few months ago, 25 different political parties participated. But this is just a beginning. I mean, let's see what it looks like in 5 or 10 years.
With the current situation?
Look at the age of democratic Russia. It's only 20 years old. How many years of democracy do you have behind you? 200 years. You cannot expect extraordinary changes. It all takes time. It has to be a normal, gradual, progressive process with the appearance of new political forces. Today, in our parliament, we have 4 political parties represented. They were formed quite a long time ago, and they represent very different points of view. There are people who could be labeled conservatives, others social democrats, communists, nationalists. But now that we have this new generation of Russians coming into adulthood, people who consider themselves to be free, who are well-educated, and they don't identify with these political parties, they would like to be represented in Parliament, and that is precisely why the President initiated this reform, in order that these people be able to form their own political party, and that is a process that is ongoing at the present time. There are several dozen political parties. For the time being, they're very small.
So it's an issue of maturity.
Yes, it's a question of time and maturity.
Now I'd like to come to the Prime Minister's visit, Mr. Medvedev, to France. There is a stumbling block between France and Russia on the topic of Syria. Russia reaffirms international law, stating that we must not interfere in an internal problem and in a civil war. Do you think that faced with a dictator like Bashar al-Assad, there is no no requirement to intervene?
Well, listen, I think that what is happening in Syria is first and foremost a civil war, but there also is armed interference by certain forces from the outside. It's a very complex and complicated process. There is also a confrontation among different movements of Islam, the Shiites, the Sunnis, etc. Syria is a multi-faith and multi-ethnic state. It's a state, the model of the present Syrian state was designed by France, and that work was done well because the state held together up until now as an island of stability in a region of instability.
At the cost of human rights, or do we disagree?
Well, human rights are violated first and foremost by radical Islamists.
And by Bashar al-Assad as well.
Bashar al-Assad as well, no doubt, no doubt. The use of force by Bashar al-Assad was disproportionate. We have said that in public. One should not paint Russia as an ally of Bashar al-Assad. That's not true. He was never our ally. But what do we want? We want, first and foremost, that all violence in Syria come to an end, a cessation of all hostilities, and in order to achieve that, you have to work with all of the forces on the ground, not just Bashar al-Assad, but also those forces from the outside that are inciting armed groups within the country. And we came up with a roadmap together with France and the United States. We did this in Geneva on the 30th of June, and the final communiqué has two essential points in it. First of all, immediate cessation of all armed hostilities, whatever the source. Second, a political process initiated involving all of the forces on the ground in order to achieve a political solution, to organize free elections, draft a new constitution, modernize Syria, and turn Syria into a democratic state.
You say that we must not intervene in order to help the rebels. I'm going to ask a question that directly concerns the Russian Federation. Why then did you intervene in 2008 in Southern Ossetia in order to separate, in effect, one territory from another territory, Georgia, which was recognized internationally as such? There again, there was an assistance to rebels.
No, they weren't rebels. It's more complicated than that. If you look at the history of Georgia and of the Ossetian and Abkhaz peoples, I mean, these are three completely different peoples. And previously, they were not part and parcel of Georgia. And when Georgia was created as an independent state after the Soviet Union, they didn't see themselves as being part of Georgia, and the separatist movements started to gain force immediately then. And in fact, if you look at old political maps back from, I believe, 1918, you'll see that Ossetia and Abkhazia were not part of Georgia.
So this is an ethnic vision that you're presenting, an ethnic vision of the national existence of a people. In order for things to work, everyone would have to be from the same ethnicity and same religion.
No, not at all. But the peoples have to accept cohabitation with the other people that they are, with whom they share boundaries. If you take the case of the former Yugoslavia, it was the same thing. Yugoslavia was a federal and multi-ethnic state. Now you have several states created on the basis of ethnic homogeneity. I believe that that was a bad solution. It should have been done differently, but one cannot rewrite history. Now, our intervention in South Ossetia in 2008 took place because those people were threatened with extermination by the Georgians who were shooting at civilians.
And you believe that the Syrian people is not threatened by the Bashar al-Assad regime?
No, I don't think so. Syrian people, unfortunately, are threatened by everyone, not just by Bashar al-Assad, by the Islamists, by the jihadists, by the Salafists, who have come in from elsewhere in order to engage in war with Bashar al-Assad on the territory of Syria, and amongst one another as well. It's much more complicated than that. There's reference, for instance, to this Free Syrian Army. Well, it's not an army. It's a disparate group of armed bands that are uncontrolled and uncontrollable. Everybody's shooting at everybody else. It's general anarchy. So we have always said that if we don't stop this, it could last for years and years. Syria, unfortunately, may go the same path as Lebanon, where there was war for years. Is that what we want? Of course not.
everyone shoots at everyone else. There is a coalition, nonetheless, that was created, that was recognized by the French president. Is that not important in your eyes?
Yes, yes, of course.
Does that not have
Not
some
at
value?
all. It is not pointless. It means something. It's an important step toward the constitution of an opposition that could sit down at the negotiating table with other political forces. What we reproach this new coalition with is the fact that it doesn't represent all the Syrian people. If you look at the composition of that coalition, you will see that it's first and foremost Sunnis. I mean, there are no
one will
allowance.
ever represent all of the Syrian people.
No, but if there is to be a real coalition, I mean, a coalition means what? It means a bringing together of different groups representing different layers or parts of society. As I've said, Syria is a multi-faith and multi-ethnic state, and so that coalition should include Alawis and Christians. And there are thousands and thousands of Russians in Syria. They are in danger, and we are worried about their fate. And that is why I think that the constitution of the coalition is going in the right direction, but it's not enough. You can't stop there. All of the forces of Syrian society should be represented either through that coalition or through some other group, and then they should start to negotiate at the same table.
That will be the last word, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much for having come. You are still watching France 24, and there is no reason to switch the channel. Thank you.